So I've come here today to share my story with you, my children, my daughters. I want you to know that although my name is not in the records, I feel nothing because I know that even without a name, God called me for purpose. I am such a crucial part of His plan, and He does that to each of us. Even when there's no accolades, there's no record of your name and who you were, you leave behind a legacy for humanity. So today I want to share mine with you. I married a great man, and like many women who marry men of power and men of authority, we can feel like we fall in their shadow. It's not necessarily true. I married a man called Noah, and Noah's name means rest. And his father called him that because he said that hopefully through the son would come some comfort after the hard toil of getting produce from the land because of the curse. And my father-in-law would know about that curse. We all knew about that curse. Because when Noah was born, it was only 130 odd years since Adam had died, and his son Seth had only died 50 years ago. So it was fresh cultural memory. Noah's father sat at Adam's feet and heard the story of creation and how God had spoken the world into being. And we heard about the curse that came because we chose our own wisdom over that of God's. And some of us remembered, and some of us cherished that there was a God who'd created this for us. I never saw the garden. Now we don't even remember where the garden is. But we knew it was real. And even though we live in the wilderness, it's beautiful. It's green and lush, quite different to the world that you now know. For when I was young, there was a canopy of water vapor that covered the whole earth. And it was never too hot and never too cold. And you never burnt in the sun. It was perfect. But times changed. And humanity was told, go and multiply and cover the earth. And all the children of Adam and Eve did exactly that. And they didn't just spread out and cover the earth. They built cities, the first one by Cain. And slowly humanity spread and settled. And I married Noah, and when he was about 500, we had started our family. We had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And they were our world. And we remembered Yahweh, but not so the rest of humanity. Violence bred violence. The order of the day was if you were strong, you could take whatever you desired. Didn't matter who it belonged to or if it was right, you just took it. Greed, lust, betrayals. It was a wicked, wicked world. It had got to the stage where we stayed home a lot, working our lands. And if you did have to go out, you chose the time, you chose to go in company, you didn't make eye contact, you didn't call attention to yourself because there was danger in that. And at home, we kept sharing our meals with our children. We kept telling them the stories of creation and of God's love and protection and passion for His people. And outside, the world spiraled. And then it got worse. For the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. So they came and took them. They broke through that boundary between the realm of the skies and the realm of the land. And from that union were born the Nephilim, a new breed of humanity, sired by spiritual beings, born of human women. And they were huge. They were giants in every way, strong, powerful. They became known as the people of renown for their violence.
Who were the sons of God?
The sons of God were spiritual beings who rebelled against God in the deepest way. And the world got worse. The violence, because the sons of God brought with them technology. They taught humanity things we weren't meant to know. And yes, we loved music. We loved animal husbandry and how to work with metal. But they also brought a knowledge of weaponry and witchcraft. And those weapons, they empowered not just the Nephilim, but people used them, not for defense, to control, to intimidate, to abuse and brutalize. And that's what the whole earth had become. But Noah led our family. We still stayed strong. We believed in God. And one day, amidst all the violence and the fear, Noah sat me down and he said to me, I have heard from God. He has told us he sees the earth and he regrets ever making humanity. He regrets it and his heart is hurting. And he sees that the evilness is so prevalent, it's irreversible. And he is going to wipe humanity off the face of the earth. And everything was infected. He was going to wipe out the beasts of the field, the things that flew in the sky, the things that crawled on the earth. Anything that breathed air through its nostrils would be gone. And then he said to Noah that he had a task for Noah. He had seen his faithfulness, and he needed him to start to act. He was to build a huge box, a massive vessel he called an ark. And we were to put into this ark animals and our family. Because when God acted, the whole earth would be submerged in water. And Noah watched my face, and I had an Eve type moment. I could choose. I could choose to trust my husband had truly heard from God and that God cared for us deeply, and we were to embark on a crazy, ridiculous project that would take us, we didn't even know how long. I've never seen rain before. Water doesn't fall from the sky or burst up from the grounds. There's no big body of water. We're going to build something that floats. And I sat thinking, and I could feel Noah's eyes on me. And I just knew, even Adam's choice had cost us so much. I wouldn't make that choice. So I reached for his hand and I smiled into his eyes and said, I'm with you. We'll do this together. And so we started on the project. And God was very specific in his design, very carefully telling Noah exactly how big this had to be. And it was huge. We'd never seen anything like this. It had to have 3 different levels, each level divided into compartments for animals, storage areas, water systems. The systems we were to use were incredible. The sound of hammering was the normal home sound. My boys grew up with a hammer in one hand and pitch in the other. I think they could paint pitch before they spoke. Because pitch we would use on the gopher wood that would hold it waterproof, sealing in the joins, inside and out. And if you've ever smelt it, it burns your nostrils. It's a smell you never forget. And we lived with that. Sawdust in everything. Sawdust got in the food. It got in your nose. It got in your ears. It was everywhere. Little splints of wood were just part of our lives. And Noah was meticulous. He followed every instruction given by God in every single way. He tested those joins as he built. He had to start building support structures to be able to get higher and higher and higher until it was 4 stories high. And he tested as he went. That type of meticulous building, it takes time. But we knew our lives and the lives of our children would depend on it. And we kept building. We kept building. And we attracted attention, something we didn't particularly want. But people started to look at us. And at first, they just laughed. What stupidity is this? What are you building? This doesn't make any sense. What is the judgment from the Creator God? If He wanted to judge us, He would have already. We're beyond His control. We're not in His garden. We can do as we please. The laughter turned to mockery. The bumps in the crowd, the cruel words, the mean sayings. They would look at my husband and call him crazy when he told them judgment would come. When he spoke about putting animals into this vessel and it would float, when you're mad. Where's it going to float? On your spit? This isn't going to happen. And then eventually the mockery got to boredom and indifference. And they took no notice of us. And we kept building. And our sons grew. And they became adults. And we kept building. And each of them in turn found a wife who joined our family. And we kept building. It took over 100 years to complete the ark. It was a mammoth task. And I can still remember the day it was done. When Noah had cleared space, the whole length of the ark had an opening that was covered with a roof that would stop the rain falling in, but allow us to harvest water and allow for airflow and light. And the last layer of pitch was done. And we stood before this huge 4-story high, massive, bigger than a field. So God, and now? And that night, we sat in our little house, and there was no hammering, no one quickly running to finish a task, because it was done. And while the men had built, us women had started to gather, because God told us that we were to take 2 of each species into the ark, a male and a female. And we were to take food enough for them and us. So we had started to stockpile lentils, beans, dried figs, grains, and those would all be taken onto the ark. And when we started loading that food up, the people were watching. I don't know what they thought. They mocked. They laughed at us. They thought that this would maybe be a nice storehouse that they could just use for the future when they didn't feel like harvesting. And we kept quiet because as we were loading that food on, animals started to arrive. Slowly, surely, different species, young animals, just started arriving and hanging around outside the area of the ark. And then God told Noah, it's time. In 7 days, the flood's coming. You need to get the animals and your family onto the ark. And you know, the mocking laughter died down just a little when the animals started to arrive. And when they calmly walked into our ark, there was an uneasy silence. And on that day, that final day, Noah was the last on board. All the animals were in, and we had to carefully place them. Who was compatible? Who had the same kind of environment? Similar types of foods? Who wouldn't eat each other? That they could be close by. It was a huge logistics. We even had farms that we would be growing our sprouts. It would be the only fresh produce we could get. But they take up little space. And you could use the manure from some of the herbivores to grow sprouts and keep harvesting. It was mammoth. We had areas just for insects. Areas for the birds. And when Noah walked in, God sealed the door behind him. And there was an eeriness to it. Light filtered from the very top, mute, dull, dust sparkling. The smell. He thought the pitch was bad. The best smell was the wood. After that it was the pitch. And then it was manure, animal urine. Just pervading methane gas rising from the stalls. Those animals were going to produce about 40 tons of waste a day. And you know, Noah had built for just that. Every floor sloped just slightly, just enough that the effluent would wash down into channels on the side. And those channels led to the edge of the boat, where we could open an opening and push it out. The water, can you imagine the water for that number of beings? Some got enough from their foods, but most needed water on a daily basis. So Noah and my sons had built these huge systems that had sand and charcoal to filter out impurities. And then from the bottom, they had a weight system that as they opened it, it would run and feed through the channels, filling up the troughs for each animal. It was phenomenal. The noise, oh my word. The sound, bleating, mooing, bellowing, squeaking, squealing, screeching. It took a while to get used to. And we began the tasks of living in an ark. Putting down sawdust and straw to help absorb the feces that made it easier to clean. Feeding, watering, cleaning, checking the walls, checking the joints. The animals took up 45% of that space. 35% was just storage. Storage for the grains, the dried fruit, the little bit of fresh food that we bought on just for us. It was phenomenal. And already after 7 days, routine had set in. We each had our allotted tasks. Our little space was about 10% we had for ourselves. The rest, the other 10 was walkways and gangways and places so we could move about amongst the animals. Ours was just about the size of this room. We had a table where we could prepare food and eat. 4 sleeping mats on the floor. And beautifully provided by Noah, a ceramic oven where we could bake our bread. And you know that table? It became the center of our world. That's where we ate our meals, where we got together as a family. We could thank God for His provision and His plan and His purpose. And 7 dry days passed. If you looked up through the skylights, the sky was clear. We could still see the water vapor. And then, on the 7th day, began to rain. It was like God literally opened all the windows of heaven. And the water that He'd separated from the earth in the beginning and made space for humanity on the land, they joined again. The water from the heaven poured in a deluge. It was heavy, pelting rain. And if you looked out, the ground was opening up and water was springing up from the ground itself. And at first, the sounds from outside, you heard people shout in astonishment, running home to take cover. And then the sounds changed. The water started to rise. The ground was starting to be covered. You became aware of screaming, fear, animals. It was like your worst nightmare that you could imagine the sounds that came in. And I think that's why God sealed the door, so we wouldn't be tempted to open it and try and rescue the people. And then slowly the water rose. You could feel the ark start to shift. Sometimes we would feel huge trees and stones hit against the side. They felt like twigs and stones. And the water raged. And slowly the ark started to move and lift. And it was the most incredible feeling if you've never been on water before. Suddenly it would shift and the water would swell and we had no way to steer ourselves. There was nothing we could do but put our total trust in a God who'd provided an ark, who'd given us the time and the design to make this work. We didn't even know that it would float until the rain came. Now we had a new chore. Now it was feed, clean out, cook, and keep watch on the joins. We had pitch with us, that if any water came through, we could heat it in our ceramic oven and go and apply it. We had lamps, but we had to ration them. Everything was rationed from day one because God had said it would rain for 40 days and nights. But we didn't know how long it would be before we could rehabit the earth, before we could find other food, somewhere to stop. We knew really quickly we could not use the water that surrounded the ark, for it was salty, it was brackish. And as the water rose, it began to contain more and more decomposing organic matter and dead bodies. For the water rose, and we could not see any land. The mountains disappeared beneath us. We floated as if we were going to reach the sky on this swirling mass of water. And if your lamp went out, it was pitch dark inside at night. We only knew the days passed because it was slightly lighter during the day. And we clung to God's goodness. We clung to those rituals of sitting around the table, eating bread, maybe figs for after, talking, praising God for His kindness and His mercy and His grace and His provision. For without Him, the very air we breathe, we would not have. And it was grueling work. We all did our bit. It was hard work. We got to know the animals. Many of them went to almost a kind of hibernation sleep because of the confined spaces, which helped us because it rationed the food. And it was a slog that went on for 40 days. And then it went quiet. The rain stopped. That pelting, driving rain stopped. And the swirling became less crazy as the waters settled. And then another 150 days passed. It's a long time to be in a confined space. Mentally, it was the most surreal feeling to know we are the only 8 humans left. These are the only creatures left that breathe air. This is all we have. And you know, we didn't know how much longer. How much longer? But in 150 days, we saw the water was slowly starting to recede. It didn't reach up as high on the sides, and somehow you could sense it was going down. God had closed the ground springs, and reset had happened. And after that time, one day, we felt this abrasion underneath the vessel. And then the ark bumped hard. It jolted me right off my feet. And we realized we'd stopped. We had come to rest on Mount Ararat. But if you looked out, there was just mud and water everywhere. So we had to still wait. We still rationed the food, and that 35% storage was starting to look very empty. The water, we were so grateful for those cisterns because Noah had made vents that we could actually harvest the rainwater that could pour into the cisterns and be purified and cleaned. But now we haven't had rain for a while. They're getting empty. And then one day Noah sent out a raven, a scavenger bird. He let it loose out into the wild, and we watched as it traveled to and fro across the water. And then sent out a dove, a gentle, delicate bird. And it flew, but it came home because there was nowhere to rest. And Noah reached out his hand and took the bird back into the ark. And we waited another 7 days. Felt like an eternity. And then again, Noah opened one of the windows and released the dove. And it was gone all day. And that night, it returned. And it returned with something in its mouth, in its tiny little beak. It had a twig, an olive twig with green leaves. That means the water's gone down enough and life is being restored on the earth. And we waited another 7 days. And then Noah once again released the dove, and it did not return. It had found somewhere to rest. And then 370 days after we entered the ark, God told Noah, remove the covering. We removed the covering and we looked out across a new world. It was starting to dry out. Shoots were starting to come up in between the mud. It was washed clean. And when you looked up, there was no vapor cloud above it anymore. It was gone. And God told Noah to release the animals, to open the door of the ark and return them to the earth where they could go out, be blessed, be multiplied, take over the earth. To try and explain how it felt when that door opened and raw sunlight kissed our skins and we breathed air that didn't smell like poo. It was incredible. And we watched the animals almost waking up as they came out of the ark, and they shook themselves and they either gambled off or flew away or scuttled or scrambled or slithered. And there they went. And then it felt almost like creation, because God had taken the chaos waters and divided them for land. Now he'd done the same for us. The waters had stopped, they'd receded, and he'd placed us on a mountain where we would be safe. And now all the animals were sent out to roam free. But there were differences. There was no garden. God didn't walk with us in the eve of the day. And there were 8 of us, not 2. But it was a new world with a new beginning. And we had packed seed to replant the earth. And God blessed Noah and my sons, blessed our family, and he said, be fruitful and multiply and steward the earth. But unlike Adam and Eve, who'd been told to eat of the plants, God told us we could eat from all living creatures. They were there for us. And you know, there was such grace in that, because it was going to take time to prepare the soil, time to plant, time to grow, time to harvest. And we would run out of our little bit that was left. So that's what we started to do. We started to prepare the soil to farm. We learned to catch fish and to cook them. And my sons had children and they grew. And Noah was over 600 already. He decided he needed to plant a vineyard for grapes. So he did. And he planted it and he cared for it, and those grapes grew. They did so well. And he harvested the grapes, and some of them we ate were delicious. And he decided he wanted to make some wine, which he did. And either he didn't know how strong it would be, or maybe the stress of building for 120 years and over a year on an ark with all the animals, he had a little fall and he drank too much, way too much. My son Ham went into his tent and his father was drunk, unconscious, and naked. And instead of Ham being honorable, maybe covering his father or saying nothing, he took a delight in his father's fall. He humiliated him He went and called his brothers to come and witness his father's humiliation, his father's fall from grace. I was devastated. It showed such a poor heart within my son after all we'd been through. My other two sons, their hearts were like their father's. And they took a robe and they put it on their shoulders and they walked backwards into their father's tent. Their faces turned away, they dropped that robe over him to cover his nakedness and his shame. And when Noah awoke from his drunken sleep, he was so upset that Ham could treat him like that. And he called a father's blessing on Shem and Japheth, but not on Ham. And he said that he could see Ham's son was just as bad, and that the bloodline that came from them would serve their cousins and uncles forever, for Canaan was just as bad. And my heart broke. No mother wants to hear that. And we could see why God had said that even though men's heart was still evil, he had promised he would never flood the earth again. He made a promise to us and all our descendants and the creatures. And you could see why it was needed. And that's the saddest part of my tale, because after this whole glory of God's care and provision, how he fulfilled his promise to us, how he cared for us, how he planned for us, to know there was still evil in the hearts of men. And now I look upon you all, and you've heard the story before. You know about the flood. Your parents maybe told you. Because Noah went on to live another 360 years. And I walked by his side. And while his name might be the one the world remembers, I know that even then God saw us as so important. He put 3 women and myself on that ark. And I know that he used us to fulfill his purpose, to restart creation. And I look at each of you, and in each of you there's something of me. And that is my legacy and my delight. And that is the story of Noah's life.